it is very difficult to predict future, especially in this uncertain world. If you take the example of RCEP, very odd number of countries have come together for some economic benefit, who have quite the political differences are very strong. And the classic example can be China and Australia, which are right now at a loggerheads on several issues, several strategic issues, but are also tied up by a same agreement, which was which government of India at some time point showed willingness to join, but at the end walked out of it because of partly because of the domestic compulsions and partly because of changing global scenario. And at hindsight, now the experts are saying that we have taken the right decision of not joining RCEP. Similarly, if you see the SAARC example, because of the very peculiar attitude of Pakistan, there was a need to bring the neighborhood countries on a different platform, and the BIMSTEC platform has emerged, and so on and so forth. I can give you examples. So, but also in the traditional kins or kinhood has also seemed to be making less relevant, if not totally irrelevant. And one of the classic example is the NATO Alliance, which was formed for the security of entire Western world after World War II. But especially during the presidency of Mr. Trump, NATO has been given less and less importance. Mr. Trump has put enormous pressure on NATO countries to enhance its military spending, and therefore saying that they cannot perpetually remain dependent on US for their security needs. And on the other side, you have also seen that just before COVID, during the COVID, the strong anti-China statement to be issued by the European Union was diluted, and criticism of China was actually removed from the EU statement under pressure of certain European countries. So these are the kind of fluxes that are happening in world all over, and COVID has actually compelled everyone to almost like a reboot button in the term of IT, if I may say so, for everyone to rethink their domestic priorities as well as their global interests. And because I come from healthcare background, I would say that in a post-COVID New World Order, my sincere hope is that people will start thinking more about healthcare, not as a luxury of few, but also the quality healthcare which is affordable. In Europe, it was always there because of very strong public healthcare system, but their limitations have also come out very strongly, especially in the countries like UK, where they simply couldn't provide healthcare to several elderly people, and by their own critics, a lot of elderly people were quote unquote allowed to die in order to save the younger population. And the large amount of deaths that have happened in old age care homes in UK has shown the limitations of NHS as a system. Similarly, in the countries like India, there was enhanced emphasis on privatization of healthcare. We'll have to now rethink about the public healthcare system, which is relatively good in India, but not adequate. both in terms of quantity as well as quality. We will have to rethink how we should reshape the healthcare system in order to have both affordability and the quality being a basic principle behind the healthcare system. And I can give you many more examples of this kind. So my immediate thought is that people will start investing in the quality healthcare system because if there is another pandemic like COVID in the future, and no one is denying that possibility, similar challenges will emerge, maybe more grave challenges will emerge. And in that case, it will be impossible to face that pandemic with the current infrastructure. Second part is definitely an environment or climate change. And people have become more conscious about climate change, more conscious about protecting environment, and that's a good development. And there will be a lot of green movements will take shape in future. That is what I feel. On the other hand, as Professor Mahapatra has clearly stated out, that China will emerge as a major challenge, not only to India, but also to almost all the countries who believe and who would like to abide by the rule of law and certain principles of international relations in spite of differences. And many of you must have heard the word wolf warrior diplomacy, where there is a movie called Wolf Warrior, many of you must have seen. And then there are, in the finance sector, there are many such wolves always present who virtually try to decimate any potential rivals. And similar such a wolf warrior diplomacy is now being played by China. And if you see current disputes of China in the international audience, so except barring 2 or 3 countries, China has dispute and major dispute with practically every country, not only in its neighborhood, but also in the far distant countries. Some disputes are very overt, some disputes people are not willing to define, but they are there. Part of it, the reason is also because of the very aggressive pushing of Chinese agenda across the globe under the leadership of President Xi Jinping. And that has caused, initially, people thought that it will create a lot of economic activities around the globe. It will create an alternate financial system, which is otherwise dominated by West in form of International Monetary Fund and World Bank, which basically so far serve only the interest of Western countries. As you know that IMF and World Bank are always dominated, and their presidents always come either from Europe or from United States of America. So their mandate is very clear, and the entire financial system which is governed by them will have an alternate in form of China. China has also invested heavily and given very long-term loans to almost every major African countries and also many Asian countries in form of creating infrastructure. But Chinese model has been always that when they give this economic assistance, may it be in case of CPEC, this is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or it may be in several countries, including Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, is that when they give economic assistance to those countries, it is not only in form of capital, but it also means that it is a Chinese capital, it is Chinese labor, and it is also Chinese material. So essentially, they are self-funding their domestic industries uh, at the cost of some other country. And therefore, they not only bring a poor lot of money, but they also bring the labor force in those countries. And in many cases, not even a small piece of screwdriver, screw can be purchased from a local country. Everything is imported from China. And when this enormous debt is unbearable to the country, China asks for the ownership or equity in those projects, essentially converting that loan into equity and therefore becoming the owner of that uh, infrastructure. And the classic case you must be knowing is about the port, number two port in the Sri Lanka, and also the largest airport they have built in Sri Lanka, which was termed as a world's emptiest airport because the infrastructure was so big and the number of flights coming there were so low that both the projects become economically unviable, and China virtually bought it. But people are becoming aware of it. Just last month, Tanzania has rejected a Chinese loan of $10 billion, and they say that only fool will accept such condition. That was a statement of Tanzanian president. So there is some awakening, but these are only exceptions. There are and there will be many more countries, including our neighbor on West, Pakistan, who will undergo under tremendous pressure of Chinese debt, and it will be a sovereign question in front of them on how to repay them. And the only option they may have is to transfer the ownership of this huge infrastructure they have created to China. But Chinese interference does not remain only in case of infrastructure, but they also interfere in the political system. They also interfere in the religious system. They also interfere in the social system. There are now clashes in certain African countries between Chinese laborers who have settled there after the projects are over, and they have come in contact with local communities, local women, and then new progeny, a hybrid progeny of Africa and African China. Chinese are also uh, emerging in some part of the world, and they are likely to change the demographic situation in the decades to come. So definitely China is and will continue to pose an enormous challenge to practically every country in the civilized world who believe in the democracy, who believe in the rule of law, and who believe in the certain principle of coexistence among the countries. And more to say about China is also its enormous and enhancing military power, which is kind of always keeping aggressive postures within all the neighbors in their uh, periphery, and therefore threatening all the time small countries, including Vietnam, uh, South Korea, and as far as countries like Australia with their military might. In that respect, now if you come to other major powers like America, so even though, as Professor Mahapatra has said, that America still remains a major military power, and its military annual budget is more than aggregate budget of other 10 most important countries who spend maximum on the military. So if you rank the countries based on their military expenses, budgetary expenses, definitely US comes on the top. And then if you add the military budget of number 2 to number 10, uh, that budget also still remains less than the military budget of United States. And they continue to enhance their technology. But at the same time, there are now trends within US is to have less and less engaged with the global affairs. And that kind of a situation again gives a space because nothing can remain in vacuum. Space for countries like China and Russia to an extent to spread their influence into these countries. And the classic example is Central Asia and also in the part of East Asia, Turkey, Yemen, where very conflicting forces are right now playing their war games. And depending on who stands where, you can see the situation changing dynamically, sometimes overnight. Few years, as you remember, just to give one instance, that one Russian plane was shot down by Turkey, and therefore almost they were on the verge of war. But in last few months, you can see the new kind of cooperation between between Russia and Turkey, so that uh, the American influence in that region goes in order that should go down. So this is kind of weird sometimes, which defies all the logic. These kind of alliances are being taken, are emerging, and they will continue to emerge even in the future. Third part is of this whole game, or is a puzzle, is Europe. And Europe is overall is in a flux, and I would say that their influence on the global affair is definitely lowering in the last decade or so, and it will continue to do so because they are more again involved partly because of their own questions. They also are facing enormous challenges because of their because of flux of immigrants after Syrian war, Muslim immigrants mostly, and because of their open boundaries, there are enormous demographic changes are taking place in Europe, including UK, and those changes are resulting into increased crime against women, uh, increased thefts and murders, and the so-called tranquility in Europe is being disturbed very rapidly in many countries. And if you see the increased crime rates in those countries, they themselves will prove what I am trying to say. Economically, also, Western Europe especially is not doing great. Their growth rate is uh, very minimal, and their population is aging, especially the working population is not there, and therefore this influx of immigrants, which they think will partly substitute this working population, is actually creating a lot of social tensions and law and order issues in these European countries. And it is not likely to change uh, in the near future. The last one is a very enigmatic country to an extent, which is Russia. on one side is trying to reassert and reclaim its position as one of the alternatives to United States of America, but at the same time, their economy is not very strong. Their main supplies of export, which is the natural gas and the oil, is also in uh, trouble because of the falling oil prices. And there will be a political stability, as you must have seen last week only. Mr. Putin has been allowed to stay as the president for next, I guess, 12 years or 18 years. So there will be a political stability as in China, but how Russia as a country will emerge as economically strong will be matter to be seen. But at the same time, they are very strong militarily and as well as being a strong nuclear power will continue to play a big role in the global affairs. Lastly, I would touch upon the Middle East countries. There is a big change that is happening in those countries also because again the oil prices which have crossed $100 per barrel at just a few years back, 5, 7 years back, are now trading some 30, 40 dollars per barrel, and it is putting a lot of stress on their very lavish spending based economy. And the oil prices are not likely to go high and reach some 80, $90 per barrel in the near future. And it will again cause the enormous stress on their balance sheet. But at the same time, they are very cash rich and they are investing into the new areas. They are acquiring global firms, and therefore they will continue to have a big money power uh, globally, even though their strategic power in terms of uh, in terms of controlling the oil supply or energy supply, and therefore enhancing their bargaining power with rest of the world is clearly declining. Also, partly because of the new countries like Russia, like United States also, who have become now major suppliers of energy across the world because of the shale oil revolution in US. As you know that even in India, we are now buying close to 8% of our oil from United States. And therefore, our dependence of the country like India is also relatively less dependent on the Middle East as far as our oil's global supply is concerned. So this is by and large the overall scenario as of today. It is very difficult to predict what will emerge as a new world order, or will there be any new world order which is rule based, which is based on mutual understanding and of course competitiveness, but fair play. And I don't see that is to happen in the at least over a decade or so, partly because of the uh, Chinese assertiveness, which basically doesn't believe in any rule of law, while they only say that whatever is convenient to them is the rule. And the relative reluctance of major global powers to play a major and assertive role uh, in the world affairs because they themselves are busy in the domestic affairs. So overall, I say that the next decade or so will remain uh, in a great flux. And in that situation, India, with its unique position and advantages, can play a major role within its limitations. Of course, India has limitations in terms of both economic power and the military power, which is not as big as several developed countries in the world. Our resources are likely to be more and more consumed for the development of our own citizens, and which is quite natural. But India's approach of cooperative development is likely to play a major role in this exploitative development model of China, and therefore India can create its niche space in the global affairs uh, and put forward an alternative model uh, because the political stability is also very well established in India. We have a leader like Prime Minister Modi ji, uh, who can uh, play a major role not only because of his vision but also his proactive leadership. And we are quite fortunate to have someone like him at the helm of affairs at this critical juncture. And therefore, I am reasonably confident that India will be able to create its own space in this flux and give some stability to the world affairs.